It is 5 p.m. We're going to call the meeting to order. We have a declaration of a quorum of 7 members. Amanda Green is joining us on the telephone. We'll move to item C1, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2020-21 budget. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer, board members. It is my pleasure to introduce our new CFO, Ms. Amy Draws. So be gentle. This is her first board presentation. I'm sure that she'll do an exceptional job, though. Ms. Draws, show us all that extra money you found since we got rid of the last CFO.
And I know you're going to miss not doing this. So, okay, there it is. Please ask questions if you don't understand something I'm explaining, because I'm not sure exactly where you've been in the past on this topic. So please ask questions, or if I say a term you're not used to, stop me, and I'll be glad to explain. But I always start every budget discussion with, where are we for this current year? Because we've got to know a good base for where we're going. So I always look at the current year, and you guys, from what I've seen, have always done this as well. So this is some estimates for 1920. We are looking at a little over 13,000 average daily attendance. That's about a 2.7% increase. You are right at what you budgeted, or slightly above, I think, but right there. Estimated revenues of over 118 million, and this is forecasted to the end of the year, okay? And 120 million in expenses. We believe we're going to have about $900,000 in what's called property tax refunds, and these are large judgments or court-ordered refunds. Taxpayers have maybe paid their taxes, but they want to pay them to avoid penalties, but they are protesting them, and a judge has mandated. To date, I think you've done about 700,000. We're expecting more. So those are unanticipated when you start the budget. So looking at about a deficit of about 2.7 million, that's including this 900,000. But you started with about 3.8 was your originally adopted budget. Or 3.4, I'm sorry, I didn't fix that number, somewhere around in that range. So tracking better than what the original budget has. Now I will say that we also have, we're going to talk about some extraordinary items, or exceptional items are also extraordinary sometimes, right? Sure.
When you were talking about the $900,000, how long does it usually take for that stuff to wash out? So it goes to court and there's some hearings. Does that lag?
I haven't seen the actual judgments this year. Some of them you've already paid. We're waiting on one, but sometimes it can be as much as 2 years. Okay. 2 to 3. Now, the district should get most or all of this back whenever, because as your property values go down, your state revenue goes up, right? So we will get this back, but we have an attorney firm or a legal group that files the adjustment for us, and it takes a year to 2 years to get this back. So if you look at revenue up there, you've got prior year settlements of 662,000. Those were judgments that were done in previous years that you got in this fiscal year. So we're going to get this back. It's just not going to be in the current fiscal year that it occurred.
Okay. I've seen it before, but I was just curious if it's something.
Sometimes it can take several years.
Okay.
But that's why if they lose, they still owe penalties and interest. And so many of your taxpayers are going to go ahead and pay to avoid that penalty and interest, just in case they don't lose, or maybe it came somewhere in between. So they're not going to get the full amount that they were asking for.
And typically what occurs is when there's a settlement and it's issued to the tax office, as there are collections on behalf of the school district, they hold those funds back instead of them rolling forward to us. So they don't ever actually get to us, because they hold them out of current year collections, if that makes sense.
And that's what they're doing right now on another judgment that we're anticipating. They just don't have it's already been ruled on, we just don't have all the paperwork. Now, one thing this does not take into account is the coronavirus relief funds, or the CARES Act monies that we are going to get. because in reality, they're going to give us funds, but then they're going to reduce our state revenue by the same amount. So once we flow all that through, you're going to have a reduction in revenues, but also a reduction in expenditures. So the net bottom line, we're hoping will be about a wash. We're hoping that your expenditures don't exceed what that relief fund is. So just please keep that in mind, that we will change by over $1 million in both directions, revenue and expense. So getting into the budget for this next year, 2021, there's a number of challenges, most of which all came up because of COVID. We're in the second year of the legislative session, should be clean sailing. It's not so much this year. First of all, we've got some student enrollment numbers that may not follow historical trends or what the demographer projected for you, because kids have been home. Some of them may have relocated, gone to grandma's for the summer or for during this time for care, may not be coming back. People may be changing their minds. So we've got that unknown in there. We also don't know what the educational school day will look like. I think they're gonna talk about that later, and how that might impact attendance and or enrollment. We know there's some potential changes, or there will be changes, in how we're going to calculate average daily attendance, and that's how we get our monies. Originally, they said they were going to announce this last week, and then we were going to have a phone call today at 3, and now it's been postponed till Thursday. So depending on how that goes, these numbers could change a lot. So please keep that in mind, but we will keep you updated as much as possible. We're also experiencing lower than normal property value growth. We also anticipate this to continue into 2021. Your values are as of January 1 each year, and so COVID and the economic issues were not here in January 2020, although we are having a lot of protests right now, I think, because of that. But this year and 2021 are going to be very unknown. And we have some delays in getting that information, or what our estimates are. And that's not the appraisal district's fault. We have a very good relationship with our appraisal district, but there were delays in these face-to-face appeals that are happening. They have a large number of appeals, and they're working through them as fast as possible. But they have assured me that they are on target to give us certified values by the end of July on time, and that's very impressive. I think some districts are not going to get that. So kind of out of their control, but they're keeping us updated as quickly as possible. So those are all of the things that we have kind of going on, along with normal issues. Questions? Okay, estimating revenues for next year, and this is based on how we calculate average daily attendance right now. I think originally we were looking at about a 2.7% increase in average daily attendance. Just to be conservative, we've backed that off to 2.25, just to make sure, because we're not sure where it's going to be. The tax rate is currently at 97 cents. On the M&O side, based on state calculations, that will decrease. Kind of a complicated formula, but they're estimating it's based on about a 4% growth, which we do not think we will hit, but it's still factored in here, and they will hold us harmless. We also have included the one additional penny, what's called a golden penny. I'm not sure if you've heard those terms, but they've been used for quite a while. But because College Station 2 years ago was at $1.04, you have the option, if the board votes unanimously, to get one additional golden penny. So all of these numbers reflect that additional golden penny. When you get to the bottom, it's about 122 million, so 3.5 million of additional revenue from what your adopted budget was for 1920. I'll tell you the estimate that I ran, this additional penny is bringing us about $1.6 million.
And Amy, on the additional penny, that is simply adopting the proposed budget 7.0. That is how that's calculating
Yes.
it. Okay.
So it's about 1.6 million. So it's a pretty big number, about $1 million in property taxes and 600,000. And what that golden penny is, that as you get more state money, on a golden penny. So about $600,000 of state money. So it's quite a bit there. Your TRS on behalf, if you're not sure what that is the amount that the state pays TRS on our employees' salaries. So it's $165,000 more, but we're also going to see that same amount in increased expenses. So that's a wash. Your interest earnings, that is something we are really recognizing this year, and in all of your projections, that lower interest earnings has been calculated as well. So about $3.5 million based on this average daily attendance and that additional penny in revenue. And then in expenses, about $124.7 million. And we got about $2.9 million in increases factored in here, or net increases, and those are detailed at the bottom. $1 million in new position request, $1.5 million in raises and benefits. We have $1 million savings, and that's by just kind of scrubbing the payroll budgets and seeing where you've been tracking in the past several years and feel like we can take some savings there for the year. And then TRS, increase in utilities, campus program budgets and fine arts. A lot of that is due to just increased enrollments. I'm going to prepare you early for property and casualty insurance. We have already been told to anticipate an increase there. That is not unique to College Station. It is a nationwide issue. So we need to factor that in. And then some additional and capital outlay for potential projects that go throughout the year, trying to replenish that fund. So last year you adopted almost about a $3.4 million deficit. This year, based on everything we have so far, we're estimating about a $2.7 million estimate. Okay, talked about, we've included $1.5 million in this proposed budget for compensation, raises, and benefits. And we're not ready to go over details yet, but kind of look at what the district's priorities are with that $1.5 million. We used TASB to review our data, and they have some comparison districts who College Station compares with as well as competes with when hiring and recruiting. So the goal with this compensation is to focus on College Station's ability to recruit and retain qualified, highly qualified staff. So TASB and what they're looking at is that we are a little below most of our comparison markets on the beginning teacher salary, so we want to focus on that. There are some areas within the teacher salary that we are below our market, so we want to focus on those particular areas. We want to review the compensation for all other staff. We have what we call pay boxes, where there's a minimum, midpoint, and a maximum based on your job duties and job classifications. So review if we need to increase those any. And then we would like to give a salary or rate increase to all eligible employees of the district. So that's what we want to focus the $1.5 million on, but we need to get a little further in our revenue projections before we bring you any details. Debt service fund. This is another fund that you will be required to adopt the budget on. Currently, the tax rate is 26.9 cents. And looking at our scheduled debt for next year, as well as we're looking at potentially refinancing some bonds that are eligible, and also maybe redeeming some early to save both the district and taxpayers in the long run. That would be paying principal off early on some. We feel like we can do that and still lower this debt rate a half a penny or so. So give a little bit of relief, but still pay off some debt early and save the taxpayers and the district in the long run. We should have some more information in July on this particular item.
What are some of our, on some of the bonds we have right now, I know I'm asking you something that's might be on top of your head or not, but on some of the bonds, what are some of the higher rates that we have on them right now?
I can't
we
answer
talking-
that. I
okay.
haven't gotten that far yet into the data.
Okay. Is it going to be considerable, you think, on the bond rates today compared to what we have?
He sent me some estimates on the projected savings, and I haven't reviewed them in detail. I can't remember what they were. I did look at them, but he will
wasn't-
be here in July to go over
Okay,
that.
I wasn't trying to throw you a curveball.
No, that's okay.
And
I don't mind saying what I
a
can.
lot of you, Michael, several of you that have been on the board know Victor Quiro. He is our financial advisor, and he'll be here in July to review that and position us and take the appropriate action for a refunding and a refi whenever we're prepared.
Budget timelines. So the yellow is where we are today, June 16th with another update. Our hope is to be able to, on the 21st of July, to bring you compensation and staffing along with a budget update. If we aren't far enough along, that'll push to August. That's not unusual in the school business world that we don't adopt salaries and increases until August. So we like to do it earlier, but some years it just doesn't allow. Still looking at July 27th for our certified values. The advertisement that will go in the newspaper and on our website will come somewhere between the 1st and the 8th. And one date I didn't put on here, but it's kind of strange, but the state by August 5th has to give us the final calculations on our maintenance and operations tax rate. So we won't even know that until August 5th. So there's a lot of unknowns. They will finalize, they'll get the certified values from the district and recalculate everything. But I think the only way ours would change would be if our growth was over 4%, and it's not going to be.
And Amy is correct that based on the information the state provides us regarding the calculation of ADA next year also plays a factor into the timing of our decisions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And can I clarify one thing just real quickly? Often for the compensation, we do that early. And so we're saying you're going to give us some more details in July, and wouldn't plan to vote on that until August meeting as well?
I mean, my hope would be that we have enough information and we can vote on it in July, but if not, it could be August.
Okay.
I mean, last year, I think you guys did it in June, and that's really good, especially for the first year of a biennium.
We did it in June last year because House Bill 3 went through, so we knew what our funding was. Typically, in the first year of the biennium, in the last several years, we have went July because we were waiting for action out of Austin. With House Bill 3, they moved a little bit quicker, and we went in June. Usually in the second year of the biennium, in this circumstance where we are now, we would be prepared for June. But not knowing how they're going to calculate ADA and all the different variables that are involved is what I think will be ready by July unless TEA keeps punting some of that information out to where we can't make very accurate projections.
And we should, even though we won't have certified values by the July meeting, we will have a good idea of where those values are going to end by that point in time. So we're hoping July that we can bring that. It's unusual. Second year of the biennium, we usually know more.
And is there maybe a way that we could try to get a look at that ahead of that meeting, some of the compensation pieces of it, so we are more prepared to vote at that meeting? Obviously, we'll have it for the agenda, but
Right.
I'll just say, and personally for me right now, we're at that place where, there's so many unknowns. We don't know about the budget for the next couple of years. But on the other hand, compensating our employees is
Yes.
necessary, especially when you're telling us that, we're not maybe competing with, some of our comparable districts. So it's something
And when
that
I say that,
it's important to me.
it's not in all areas. There are some areas, even in the teacher area, that y'all are at or above the market. It all depends on the teacher tenure. So there are some areas that you're very well placed. But we want HR to be able to recruit well, so we'll be focused on that. So This was in place before I got here, but we do have new personnel requests that came in. $1 million is planned in the budget so far. They've given approval to post for hire a little over 228,000. They are all in the special education areas. And right now, we're going to hold off a little bit or as much as possible till we have more information on student enrollment and funding. But of the million, we've approved 228,000 to be posted and start interviewing on. And those exceptional items, again, pretty large number, almost 4 million have been asked for. And to date, we have approved 300,000. Those are in furniture, band instruments, and science equipment in that area. And those have been included in the budget projection that I showed you when we first started the presentation. So that's already been included. So where do we go from here? We're going to continue to follow our property values for the current year. We're going to listen to any of the changes that's coming from TEA on our ADA calculations, monitor student enrollment and how those registrations are coming in, finalize the compensation plan for next year, and believe it or not, we're already looking for the next biennium. We haven't even adopted this budget, but I'm already looking for 2 to 3 years down the road. So that's what we have next. This is a 3-year projection, and I'm going to tell you, take this with a grain of salt. It's information only. It's all based on the current funding formula with some inflation in there for student enrollment and expenses. But we're not even certain what our revenue calculation is going to be for this year, and we can almost be certain the legislative session is going to have changes. So this is based on the best information we have. So we can't do a lot of analysis on this, but.
Are we anticipating any kind of a decrease, like a 5% or a 10% decrease?
I think you can plan on a decrease.
Well, yeah.
Historically, I don't know if it's going to be a percentage, but, historically, you hate to say, but it has been in the past when the state was short revenue that K through 12 public ed
Right.
funded a lot of that shortfall. So we hope that doesn't happen. House Bill 3, they made some great strides in making that correction, and we haven't even finished a biennium. So we hope that doesn't happen. But I am anticipating some declines, and I don't know what percentage that will be. They've got sales tax revenues that are down. They have oil and gas revenues that are down, plus the additional state expenses for COVID-19. There's a number of factors that come into play for the state.
What's built in the out-year projections that Ms. Strauss has there in your payroll cost are compensation and new positions. So there's a couple million, 2% add each of those out years, which is if things don't go so well in Austin, then obviously that's where your largest amount of your money is. So there's an additional over $2 million in each of those out years, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
For additional compensation and new
And
personnel.
positions.
And you're really in your fund balance. I'm fortunate to come into College Station with a very healthy fund balance. It's not my recommendation or practice to, draw that down for regular operational expenses. But what it does give you as a board is, since it is healthy, we want to make wise decisions if we have to make budget cuts. And so if we have to dip into it a year, you've got a very healthy position. So it gives everybody time to study data and make wise decisions on where reductions need to take place. If you have to use it for a year, then it's there. So that's a good thing. You've got a very healthy fund balance.
Could you give us kind of as brief as possible, which I'm sure you could talk on it for days, but the golden penny and how that works, kind of disadvantages, advantages to using it, if, any issues that we should be concerned about?
Yeah.
Thinking about it.
There's actually 3 terms. There's, their copper, your silver, and your golden pennies, okay? Copper penny is just what, a penny is a penny, okay? And then your silver pennies were from, it used to be from the dollar to the $1.04, where you got a little bit of extra money. And then the golden pennies are what we call the enrichment pennies. And so if you tax at that level, you will also get state revenue. So that's the example that I said, if we utilize that one additional cent, and you guys are Chapter 41, this doesn't have you in recapture. That makes a lot of difference when you were in recapture if you would go for those additional golden pennies, because you might just be given most of it all back in recapture. But you're not in these scenarios. So that one additional penny brings you about $1 million in local tax revenue, but $600,000 in state revenue. And that's why they call them golden pennies, because in essence, a penny is worth more than a penny. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So is there any issue though with, you know, either use it or lose it? And so if we didn't use it this year, for instance,
That's a great question. I believe once it's there, but we don't add to it again. They do have this year, the option to add it. Because we do have another biennium, I couldn't promise you that they might not change that. So right now, I believe you could do it again, but everything's going to be up for review. So it's, at this point, I would say you use it, might lose it.
Right, because also you just said too that if we're a recapture district, then we lose it. I mean, there's basically no point. If we
Well,
become
it's
a
not at
recapture district.
100%,
Right,
but
right.
that was under the old funding formula. I haven't
Okay.
studied that under the House Bill 3. Mr. Martindale may have.
Okay.
I'm familiar with Chapter 41 districts. I need to study it a little bit more for Chapter 41. They're under recapture because I haven't worked with very many in that category.
And if we're able to lower, because you said something earlier about lowering by about half a penny, right? So we're not quite offsetting it, but
It's chapter, with House Bill 3.
Well, there's two
Chapter
things.
41 is now Chapter 49,
okay.
which are both bad. That means they take your money at a certain equalized wealth level, local revenue. So what you see in Amy's projection on the M&O, the 96.62 cents, that includes the fifth golden penny.
That includes it.
Now, it's there already. So due to House Bill 3 and compression components within the funding of House Bill 3 that are a part of that legislation, your M&O tax rate's going to be compressed down anyway. So it's going to go down a little bit like she's showing here, not a whole lot, but even with that penny in there, it's being compressed down. And in her projections in the out years, if you go back to that one,
Yeah,
Amy,
it's
that
still
goes
there
next
too.
biennium, if House Bill 3 continued to play into things, you can look at the tax rate in the out years in 21, 22, 22, 23. So that continues to be the compression due to the additional funding from the state through House Bill 3. So she's projecting out your tax rate as well, and that has that penny in there.
Yes.
Once you do it, it's there. You might not have the option to do it again unless you go to TRE or voter approval.
Right, voter approval.
So
can be there.
with House Bill 3, it allows the board to adopt or approve a budget that's presented with the fifth golden penny in there. But that, I haven't seen that, you've been able to do that without going to TRE before. So I think that's just a component of House Bill 3.
And then on the debt service side, we think
Correct.
we can take a little bit off of that, maybe another half a penny. So, but that additional is calculated in that. So you got a slight decline in the maintenance and operations rate, pending everything kind of staying the way we think it's going to run, and possibly another half a cent on the debt service.
And Amy, this also is assuming 0% growth on property values this year, correct?
Yes, for this year, I
Okay.
factored in a slight increase. I think 0 for this year and the next one, because I'm anticipating that happening with the economy the way it is for this year, but then a slight increase for the following year.
And the higher that value goes up in the out years, if House Bill 3 stays intact, the more it will compress that M&O tax rate.
Right.
Okay, and this may be a goofy question, but I just have to ask it. I know. So if we have drastic changes to our school year next year, we'll be able to fill those with the current budget. That's our prediction, that if any, like any changes that we have, we'll just work it into what we have already,
So when you say changes, what do you mean, Ms. Nolan?
I don't know, say, I don't know. I
So
don't know what could, I
the
don't know what.
reason,
Yeah, what could happen?
so the reason, yeah, exactly. Oh, my goodness.
What more could happen?
Never mind. I got choked on my mask. The reason we have $1 million set aside for new positions, the reason we've only spent 228 is not because we don't need other positions. Well, who's to say if we need, there are some we need regardless of enrollment, but we haven't spent it, and we've been going slow with that until we know what that ADA calculation is going to be and those types of things. So that keeps us a little light on our feet these next 2 months. At least it gives us some buffer. So maybe if they change some calculations that don't go our direction, then we have that room in there where we have not allocated out all that new position money that would help us manage things. So that is a little bit that's there right now. Then, of course, that is why you also take your time with that compensation piece. So again, we're thinking, you think worst case scenario, which I don't know that, I think
even
it's
know we
all
should go
going to be
there.
fine, but that's why we're just taking a little bit longer because there's so many unknowns. Because what you don't want to do, and I've seen a district or two already approve compensation, to be honest, and if things get changed dramatically on them, they could find themselves in a very bad situation. So I would rather we take time and know our circumstances as much as possible before we commit out, a couple $1 million in our budget. So, and I don't know if I really answered your question or not, but who's to say anything as far as next year at this point, Geraldine, quite honestly, is an anticipated guess.
I know.
And I think the fact we were supposed to know what TEA was supposed to give us information on funding Thursday, and then it was moved to today, and now it's later this week or next week, shows you the magnitude and how complicated those things are at the state level even. So we can manage a couple $1 million swing and keep ourselves where we're at. Now, it might not be comfortable, but we can manage it if it occurred.
Right.
So, and that's, again, why I haven't just said, let's add a bunch of positions. First, we don't know if we need them because we don't know what our enrollment growth is going to be. And secondly, I don't want to add a bunch of new positions if this time next year we're sitting here and the state budget is just gone all over the place, and we're trying to figure out how to make up ground. I would rather play it conservative and position ourselves to be able to manage whatever might happen this time next year.
So in very, very, very plain, simplistic language, it's better to not hire and hold off on that rather than have to let people go eventually.
I did not say that.
I know, I said it. I put it in very plain.
And we would not let people go. You would manage that through attrition.
Okay,
You just wouldn't backfill positions.
thank you.
Okay.
I think it's, for some of us that were on the board, Mr. Martindale, during one of the last financial state setbacks, College Station ISD made some pretty drastic cuts.
In 2011,
2011.
Yes.
yeah.
And I think some of the oversight workshop things we've had, I think one of the things that still concerns me is there's a lot of, on the janitorial groundskeepers, there's a lot of positions that were cut that we really, I mean, it's one of the things I hope we get a chance to see very soon, because I mean, if you start looking at those positions, we've added so many facilities and stuff like that, that we really, really need some help there.
The one that comes to mind, Mr. Schaefer, is Mr. Hall did request, I think, around 8 or 9 custodial positions that were lost in 2011 at the elementary level. So those would probably, quite honestly, in my opinion, be next up, because all these years, moving into the unknown, our circumstances now, while we're all sitting here wearing masks, is we need to reset our staffing of custodial folks at the elementary level that was adjusted in 2011. So as we consider whatever with new personnel, those custodial positions to get us back up to mark at, I think it's 8 of our elementaries, 9, because Riverbend is okay because we acquired that when we opened the building. Those would be a priority. We couldn't, the cleaning and of the facilities and all those types of things during the school year in the future is not something that we could manage shorthanded. We'd need to address that. So that would be a priority in my mind. And I think it was 9 positions, and we'll typically budget around $22,000 for those. So you're looking at about $190,000 to that 220 add. So you're still, even then, leaving yourself over $500,000. We've thought about this a lot, I promise you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you all very much.
No. Great discussion and conversation.
Okay,
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. And to summarize, we're okay. We just need to be very slow and diligent about our decision-making, and we'll be just fine. And while we're slow and diligent, that's what keeps us in a good place. All right, Mr. Schaefer, we're on to item 2.
We will move to item 2. We will move to item 2, consideration and discussion regarding instructional planning scenarios for the 2020 and 21 school year. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you. And Dr. Trammell and Mr. Mann are going to share with us. You have paper copies of this as well, because as you kind of go through it on the screen, some of it's difficult to read, so you can follow through on the paper copy that she's provided you. Dr. Trammell, Mr. Mann have been working with a number of our principals and our CNI coordinators, taking feedback from teacher survey provided at the end of the year by our principals to their teachers, also being cognitive of the survey information we got back from parents toward, I think that was April, May, regarding at-home learning. So they're taking all those things into mind, and it come up with some different possible instructional scenarios, trying to anticipate what our circumstances might be next year. So game planning all of those particular situations. So they're going to go into some detail on each of those for you. We'll go slow and steady so you can ask questions as we go. I will tell you, this is the instructional aspect. We'll build the operations piece after this once TEA tells us or shares us a little more information as far as the operations side of things. Then we can build that component and add it to the instructional framework. That way we have all this information in one place, so our community and our parents can go find it, whatever the circumstance may be as we enter into next year. So a lot of time spent on this. Dr. Trammell, I'm going to stop because this is going to take a little while. And again, of course, board, just ask questions as we go.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mann is up here with me. It was a team effort. He and I have worked very closely on this. And I have to say, it's not just he and I. It was the groups that we led that really worked the hardest. He and I took their work and compiled it into the document that you have in front of you today. So in trying to anticipate the different scenarios that we might find ourselves in the fall, we have created this document. It's organized with the different learning models at the front of the document, and then at the back part of the document is what we call a support area. And that support area would be for parents, for students, for teachers, and anyone that had an interest in going to find out more about our learning platform and how our stakeholders interact with that. As Mr. Martindale said, we did a survey of our staff, and we had great participation in that. We did disaggregate and consider our parent survey that we sent home over our at-home learning model that we had in the spring. We collaborated with our campus administrators, with our central office curriculum instruction staff. So a lot of different information went into this document. Essentially, we came up with 4 different models or scenarios that we might find ourselves in. On-site learning is pretty much just typical school. We know that we are probably going to have some CDC guidelines that we will need to follow when school starts, if we are able to start in on-site learning. At-home learning was pretty much what we had this spring. We have improved on that based on input from our stakeholders. We have something called a hybrid learning plan and then a virtual learning plan. If you look at the graph in the booklet in front of you, I realize what's on the screen is very small. You may be able to read this a little bit better. We start out with at-home or on-site learning, and that is typical school with safety measures in place. If things were to worsen and we had to move to at-home learning, which is what we were in this spring with everyone being at home, teachers and students, then we would be prepared to move into that scenario. This is probably not very likely, but it is a possibility that we could move straight from at-home learning back into on-site learning. So we've put an arrow there indicating that situation. More likely would be that we would move from at-home learning to something that the state is doing right now, a gradual opening up. So we are calling that a hybrid learning model. So in the hybrid learning model, we would move from at home into whatever percentage the state gives us to open up. The example we're going to give you is like a 50% open model, where 50% of our students and teachers or students could be in the building at a time. And then hopefully from there, we would be able to go back into the on-site learning. If not, though, if things got worse, we would have to migrate back into everybody's at home. So you can see how everything flows from one plan to another. You'll notice at the very bottom, we have virtual learning. Virtual learning runs concurrently with all of these models. So we realize, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, there are some parents who may not be comfortable with their children coming to school, even with increased safety measures in place. So the virtual learning model that we would offer would run throughout the year, and these students would stay in this model regardless of what model the other students were in. As we look at the on-site learning, moving on, there are certain expectations that we would follow. I've mentioned the CDC guidelines, our TEA guidelines, and any local guidelines that would be put in place. These are some of the things that we expect on a typical school day to be followed. Certainly our district scope and sequence, we expect kids to be aware of their learning objectives. We expect learning to be connected to prior learning or students' lives. We expect instructional components from the teacher. We expect opportunities for students to practice their learning and apply their skills, for students to get feedback on their learning and their progress toward mastering the learning objectives, and an opportunity to reflect or have some kind of assessment on their learning. One of the things that we've included with each of the different types of learning is a chart with clear expectations for the student, the teacher, the parent, and the administrator. So if a parent wants to know, okay, with traditional on-site learning, what should my student be doing? What is the teacher doing? What is my responsibility as a parent? And what will the administrator be doing? They could quickly look at this chart and have a good idea of what each one of those expectations are for each one of these stakeholders. I won't read in detail each and every single one. I think we're pretty familiar with traditional school, but know that the student role, the parent role, and the administrator role are somewhat loosely aligned with the teacher's role. So if the teacher's going to upload weekly lesson plans, the administrators are going to be checking for that and looking for that. If the teacher posts a week at a glance, the administrators are going to be looking at that. Hopefully the parents would look at that to know what their kids are going to be learning for the week. By the way, that at a glance document was something that parents requested. They wanted to know quickly, what is my child going to be learning this week? And especially if they have more than one child, they indicated that that would be very helpful to them. So we included that in all of our models. We did that for elementary, and we also included that for secondary.
Dr. Trammell?
Yes, sir.
On this, also on site, is to ensure that we are being very diligent in growing our capacity in the use of Schoology, in particular at the lower grade level, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So one of the things that we included in our on-site learning right away was to build the capacity of our students and our parents in their use of Schoology. So even at the younger grades, we will start the school year right away, helping them be more comfortable and more proficient in their navigation with our learning management system. So you will see that in writing in this document under the teacher's role. So teach and reinforce to students how to access learning materials through Schoology. Build students' understanding and how to log into Schoology to check for lessons, follow the folder structure established across the district in Schoology. Folder structure was another item that our parents requested and suggested that would be very helpful to them. So it is something that we would teach our students right away, the folder structure that would be used, and we would use that in traditional school and all the different models so that it would be familiar to our students and also familiar to our parents and make things a little bit easier, hopefully, for them to find and understand as hopefully we won't have to move from one model to another, but should we have to move from one model to another? Thank you, Mr. Martindale.
I just want to say thank you for doing that, for listening to those comments.
You're
and
welcome.
figuring out that that's what, because I'm sure I would not have been able to explain to you, even I would not have been able to say, it needs to be this, but I think you figured it out. So
Thank you. We had some very good input from our parents and our teachers, so thank you. And again, we repeated that. That will be happening 5th grade through 12th grade as well. You'll see this placeholder Mr. Martindale referred to. So we will have an operational page after each type of learning, and our directors and department heads for operations will fill in these based on the learning model that we're in. So this is a placeholder that will be filled out at a later date for operations. As we move into at-home learning, this is defined as what we came off of pretty much in the spring. Students would remain at home and teachers would be at home as a result of an emergency related school closure. In this setting, teachers will provide instruction, learning resources, and support through the use of Schoology and other supports as needed according to what the families might need. In this model, it is expected that teachers will utilize the lesson components from on-site learning. So those 6 or 7 things that were listed on the on-site learning page, that would be an expectation here as well. So teachers would teach lessons to students through some kind of virtual means, be it Zoom or Google Hangout or other apps and structures that are available. Schoology will be utilized as the primary source or means of instruction and learning across the board, and specific expectations and schedules will be utilized to help our students, teachers, parents, and administrators manage the demands of at-home learning. Again, we have our charts for elementary and for secondary with specific roles for the student, the teacher, the parent, and the administrator. So if we flip on a dime to at-home learning, parents can flip to this section of this document and they will know the role of each of these individuals and they will know the expectations associated with those roles. We have that for elementary, and you'll notice it's very similar, yet a little bit different to what you saw on the on-site learning. For instance, one difference is we've added that teachers will have office hours for support because we realize that kids magically won't maybe need support just in the time the teacher is teaching and interacting with them within a given schedule or a lesson. We do have grading guidelines linked in here. We meet every summer to discuss and update our grading guidelines. This summer, Jeff and I will be meeting with principals on the 22nd of June. We are going to consider and look through the lens of on-site learning, at-home learning, hybrid learning, and virtual learning, and discuss that as an administrative team so that we are doing our very best to provide fair and valid grading guidelines for whatever scenario we are in.
And Penny,
Yes, sir.
when you go back to the
Yes.
elementary,
Uh-huh.
the third box down under teacher teach lessons, provide small group
Yes.
instruction.
Oh, sorry, yes. Right here.
And so we would ultimately work on defining a minimum number of virtual lessons provided a week.
Absolutely.
And a consistent schedule with the office hours as well.
We would, yes. And we would do that for elementary and secondary, and that would be done in collaboration with principals, and they would probably consult with their team leaders, their department heads on that. We would also consider the input from our families. We had some really good and frequent input from families on our at-home survey that we sent home. And it varied. A lot of our families felt like what we did was just right, but with the understanding that we were just making it through the end of the year. We understand that learning will need to be a little more rigorous because we're going to have to move on and teach whatever learning model we are in. So we're going to have to find a balance, and we'll probably seek and send out feelers along the way to find what's right for the majority of our stakeholders. But we'll consult with our principals to have a plan in place to start the year. And then, if we need to, we can always monitor and adjust that plan based on the needs of our community.
Dr. Trammell,
Dr. Trammell, I have a
Yes.
go ahead, Ms. Green.
thank you. What would be the plan then to accommodate those that don't have access to the internet to be able to log in to be taught virtually?
That's a great question, and that is in the second part of the booklet, so I'll answer that when we get there.
Okay.
But, we will
Thank
be
you.
providing some access. You bet.
Awesome. I had a slightly different question, just as we were talking about, things that would or potentially look different in at-home learning compared to what we saw over the last few months. So, I mean, you mentioned that we're trying to get a little bit more of that connection.
Yeah.
Right, that's part of it, right, with where,
Connection to students' lives, connection to prior experiences, more student discussion perhaps about the learning, more application of the learning, trying to simulate as much as we can authentic learning virtually. So we have defined those clear expectations for that.
okay, great. I mean, are there any other major changes that parents and we would expect based on the feedback? That's,
Not based on the feedback. I think parents just really, while they appreciated the social emotional learning and discussions that teachers were having with their children, I think that we all realized, the teachers and the parents realized that, academics needs to carry on if we're going to be in this for the long haul. So we're making plans to take care of the whole child. So.
thank you.
Okay. Again, like I said, the charts, the placeholder for operational procedures that will be worked on at a later date. Then we would move into the hybrid model. And I told you earlier that this is an example that we're just using. It's a 50-50 model where we might have some of the students come like on a Monday, Wednesday, another group come on a Tuesday, Thursday, and they may rotate every other Friday. One of the things in this model that we want to recognize is the hardship on families, because we realize that businesses are opening up. People are going back to work. And if school has to be in a hybrid mode, if the state says, you can open up schools at 50% capacity, we need to have a plan for that. And so as we thought through with our work groups on this, we wanted to consider our families. And so we decided that having a set schedule for children every week would be easier on our working parents than just having a schedule that would vary on a 6-day rotation or a week at a time, depending on what the parents do, it may not be easy for them to arrange for childcare. So this is just one scenario. We would probably get more input before we would move forward with anything. But
So Dr. Trammell, for example, hybrid, and this is an example. This is not
Correct.
necessarily what we're doing next year. So I want to go on the record for everybody over there. This is an example in planning, for planning purposes, in case, we're restricted to 50% capacity of our facilities. So what Penny mentioned was trying to establish a routine schedule so at least families could plan accordingly. So if we're at 50%, for example, if last name ends A through L, then those kiddos will go to school Monday and Wednesday and every other Friday. And then M through Z would be Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Friday. So at least families could plan on some type of a schedule, plan accordingly with childcare and those types of things, if this is something we encounter at all. So.
right. And so
In addition to that, and I don't know if, in addition to that, what about our staff and teachers that would be in this situation? Because they've got to be there 5 days a week and they have a childcare concern. Are we?
We would still be utilizing.
This is not set in stone, but are we taking that into consideration of what options might be available for those staff and teachers that have to be there 5 days a week, but their kid is only at school Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday? What do they do with their child if it's not possible? I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
processes.
we need to put a marker on that one because we don't have a plan for that, Ms. Dworak. In this particular design, the hybrid, you'd be utilizing 100% of your faculty and staff every day.
So I'm sure teachers, staff have kids in the district who would be on this plan, but they've got to be there 5 days a week. I just want to make sure we're going to address it.
okay.
Another detail is food. I know that's in the details.
Right, and that is child nutrition, and it is in our operational,
Right, you got it, okay.
right, we got that. Okay. The last model is the virtual learning model. And we've left this kind of generic. We're exploring several things. There's certainly softwares out there that can be used for this model. It might also mirror the at-home learning model and just flow throughout the year. We're holding our scope and sequence pretty tight. Our coordinators have already been looking at the scope and sequence for this past spring and looking into the fall to make some adjustments. They have teams of teachers coming in. Some of the teachers came in this week to start writing curriculum. The majority are coming in next week, and they will be looking carefully at those scope and sequences to make some adjustments so that we can kind of safeguard and make sure that our kids don't have gaps. We will be noting in the curriculum what was not taught this spring so that next year's teachers can be very cognizant of that, and then making some adjustments so that we are doing a good job with our curriculum as far as ensuring learning for our kids. In this model, it's defined as learning completely online. So this would be an individualized kind of model where kids would receive feedback on their work, but they would have heavy involvement from parents. We are saying that they would need technology and a robust wireless or Wi-Fi system if a parent chose this. Obviously, if a parent had a need, we are going to work with our families, but that would be the guidelines we would put in place, and then we would work with families from there. So this is a completely online model. They would not come to campus. They would be taking their assessments online. They would be doing all of their assignments online.
And this particular, later this week, either the end of this week or first of next week, we'll be sending a parent survey out, try to acquire some type of data. This full virtual is, for example, if we open up school next year and everything's ready to go, but some families still do not feel safe in sending their child, even though we're up and going, then this would be an option for those families. And with our survey that, again, we've got it prepared. I don't know if it'll go out in the next day or two, or we'll hold it for Monday. One of the questions is to ask that exactly, is to inquire exactly about that. Do you plan on sending your child back, or do you not feel comfortable, or those types of things, so that we can begin to gauge what that demand might look like, because we'll have to be aware of that so we can account for it from a staffing standpoint and those types of things. So for example, if we have X number of third grade students throughout the district whose families prefer the virtual option, then we'll have to look at the impact of that on the staffing we have and utilize some of our current staffing that would in essence be a virtual teacher, so to speak. So that is what this model captures, is we're open and we're going, and however these particular children or families don't feel comfortable returning.
Are there, when it comes to this particular model, are there any issues with the state as far as daily attendance and funding? And
this is all working under the assumption, well, actually, the commissioner said this today, and Ms. Strauss and Dr. Berry, correct me if I'm wrong, is that he said that if we're providing instruction at home or not, the state will provide funding for that. I believe I heard him at least make that comment. They're looking at me like he didn't say that, so maybe I dreamt the commissioner saying that today. This would all be dependent on receiving some type of funding associated with the student. I believe that will be captured, Mr. Ben. That is making that assumption. If there's no funding associated with these different scenarios, it would make it very difficult for us to offer. just
I
as
can
they
see-
provided funding for the at-home learning system this year, I think they're positioned to do the same as well. What I'll be interested to see is how exactly they may weight those different scenarios. So a child in person is X ADA, a child that is chooses virtual is a different ADA. Now, I say all that, that's purely speculation on my part. So that is just our thoughts and troubleshooting possible different scenarios. So none of that's fact, none of that we know with certainty. Those are just thoughts associated with the planning process.
Well, I mean, in looking at this, into the crystal ball, which is impossible, as we've learned.
If you have that, let me know.
Exactly. So for parents that are trying to plan, is this something that they can, as much as possible, count on happening, or do they need to wait a little bit longer to?
I anticipate that we're really waiting on guidance from TEA to tell us how they're going to do the funding and also the parameters for the facilities, which again was supposed to begin to take place today and did not. So I'm hoping within the next week or so, once we know what that guidance is from the state and how they're going to fund or not, and the parameters around opening or not, then we can begin to solidify those and know exactly what we can offer to our families. We simply haven't had those circumstances framed up for us from the state level, so we can't really say with certainty what we can provide because we haven't been provided that detail of guidance yet. I forwarded an email from TEA about the commissioner's call to all of you this afternoon, and if you kind of take a look at it, it said, we know everyone's waiting to get this information so they can plan for next year, so that kind of sums it up. That's the position we're in. So with this and Dr. Trammell and everyone else's work is trying to anticipate and at least have a framework so when we know more detail, we are positioned to start filling in the details of these particular plans so that we can roll it out to our families and say, okay, this is what we got, so we can start making more permanent plans for next year. Everything is changing so quickly. We also have to not get in a rush because what I tell you today could be completely inaccurate by tomorrow morning. So we just have to be cognizant about making decisions in a timely manner, but making sure we're not rushing to the decisions simply for the sake of making them and then turn around a week from now and have to go, oh, wait, never mind, that doesn't apply anymore. So there's a balance in there, I think, Mr. Ben.
Right. So, and we had put some information about the survey here. So hopefully we'll get some good, fairly accurate, as accurate as we can, information about that to inform this. So we said the first half was on the different models. The second half of the booklet is on support. And this page basically tells where you can find information. You can look down here at the chart at the bottom, and it will tell parents where to go to find this various information on the left-hand side of the chart. And then it moves on into a technology survey to see what parents need what to help meet the needs of their family. We had checkout distribution of technology for the spring. We would have that again to support our families. Wi-Fi availability, we will have that to help our families. So this is a resource for parents to go to find out more information about each one of these things. We will also have a technology help desk where we will list an email and hopefully a phone number so that parents will have somewhere to go to get help right away should they need it, and hopefully that will help with some of the frustration. If they are resourceful, we also have information for them on how to watch videos and set things up for themselves. So this is a page encouraging them to set up their Schoology account if they have not already done so. We know that most our kindergarten parents will all need to do this, but if we get new students in the district or people for whatever reason didn't have their parent account set up, Schoology and CSISD page will be helpful to them. This is an overview, a parent video guiding them on how to do that. This page is or will be hot linked so that parents can go to any one of these links and find the information they need related to the topic. One that I want to draw to your attention is viewing your child's information in Schoology. One of the things that came out in the parent survey was sometimes parents couldn't tell if their child had submitted an assignment and they didn't know how to find out. So this link would be very helpful to them to go so that they could go into that account and check to see that assignments were submitted. So this is another parent help page.
And one, before we move farther, Dr. Trammell, David, we distributed about 1,000 devices this spring, correct? Approximately 1,000 devices collectively? Okay. And so the checkout process would be similar this go around as well. I can tell you, for example, and I see Mr. Simak sitting in the back, on our regular agenda this evening, there's a purchase for laptops for Oakwood using title funds. And while that's building capacity at Oakwood, those devices, I believe it's 200 laptops, could it absolutely be utilized and distributed if we were closed down as well. So we're always looking for opportunity to add a little bit of capacity to our technology. But we passed out 1,000 last time, and we have more than that, but we're adding a couple of hundred this evening pending the approved purchase that could be used if our circumstances went that direction again.
So as far as the children that, because I know there were hard copies in addition to Schoology and all that.
Correct.
Some of the things that I saw and heard feedback on was from teachers. The hard copies, how are those kids able to get those things back to the teacher? The reason I bring that up is a lot of teachers said they would get pictures of it through their cell phone.
Right.
Or tried to email those pictures, and then they couldn't get downloaded, and it was just convoluted. So I don't know if there is an expectation or a plan on how do we help those students that just lo and behold, there's just not the technological advances that they can do that. And so they are doing the hard copies. Is that going to be an option, obviously, going forward? And then how do we get that back to the teacher so that we can move week to week?
And Jeff, part of that was not being familiar with Schoology. So I think when we look at our own site planning earlier in the document and making sure that if we are on site that we're incorporating Schoology into our regular instruction so kids are familiar, will assist us a great amount. When this occurred, the high schools were quickest to flip, even though they were the largest. But it's because they were utilizing Schoology to a large degree. And of course, the kids a little bit older, more comfortable with technology. It took us a little bit longer to get, our younger grade levels there. That's why it's going to be vital that if we're on site at school, that we are teaching those skills and how to use Schoology and going in and go ahead and submitting some assignments there and those types of things while we're on site so that we're fluent in using that management system throughout the grade levels. I think that will address some of the paper copy situation because I think it was more that's what they were comfortable with because they had not created capacity in Schoology. That is some of the feedback that I gathered. Now, sorry, Dr. Trammell, this is your
That's fine.
presentation. I'm talking way too much.
That's
I'm gonna
fine.
stop.
You're very helpful.
But do we really think we could get away with not having paper copies for like elementary school kids specifically?
We acknowledge that we will need some paper copies. Mr. Martindale.
Why are you looking at me?
Well, I mean,
I would
I didn't know I'd
prefer
set
not,
an email.
but I'm
I
not
didn't know
sure
I'd
if
set
We
an
will-
email account up for my third grader this year, but I did. And by God, it helped because she literally would finish an assignment, send it to, like, scan it to me, and I'd email it to her, and she'd get on Schoology and upload it. So lo and behold, we had that capability, but in the beginning, that's not how it was. I mean, we were having to figure something out, but I heard from different avenues that if we could make that a little easier, and I understand, hey, we were thrown into the fire and it's trial by error, so.
And I think parents and students and teachers did a great job considering we were just thrown in.
And I
So-
printed a lot of things from home too. That's the other side. And not everybody has that capability.
Right.
that-
Yeah. So, but as Mr.
of
Martindale
printing.
said, we are going to work
printer never
to
works.
build capacity for Schoology, but we will have alternative plans.
Dr. Trammell?
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question about Schoology?
Sure.
I know that there were some issues not unique to College Station regarding connectivity, users, being a lot of errors that were happening. Has Schoology addressed those issues and communicated a plan of, if we're talking about this, obviously other districts they're using Schoology. Just curious if they've given us an update on how they plan to address that if we do go back to that virtual learning scenario.
Yes, we have been in contact with them. And as you can imagine, it was quite a shock to their system also to have people from all over the United States at once just logging on to their system. So I do believe they have made some adjustments and will be better prepared in the future should we find ourselves in a similar situation.
Okay, thank you.
That answered, yeah, okay. We also have student supports in here. And so you'll see a couple of videos for kids to watch. We know that we can access Schoology on a computer, but we can also access Schoology through an app on our phone. And so this gives additional information on that. And then here is some troubleshooting information for students that they can access to help them problem solve their way through any glitches they have as they're using Schoology. This next page is a teacher help page, and we thought it might be helpful not only for teachers, but for parents and students to see kind of some of the supports that we are giving teachers with Schoology. Teachers have an entire professional learning course in Schoology with just about everything you can imagine virtually as far as training in Schoology, but this gives you an idea as a board and then as a community, some of the things and supports available to teachers. The last page in your booklet that you'll see is a page that we start to talk about folder structures. I want to draw your attention to the middle of the page. We mentioned certain things in our lessons. So the common folder structure will be built around these instructional areas in the center of the page. So lesson delivery is going to be kind of like labeled Learn It. Student learning activity is going to be practice what you have learned. Student collaboration is going to be practice it and share it. That could be at home with their family, with siblings. It could be virtually. I saw a wonderful example of 2 third graders living across town that did a project together and did a great job over the spring at-home learning scenario. So an assessment, prove it or show it, and then some kind of work submission, and that could be independent practice. An example might be if we're in the hybrid model, teachers are teaching 50% of their kids in the scenario example we gave, they're teaching 50% of their kids at school. So obviously they can't be teaching kids in the classroom and teaching virtual lessons as well. They could record and kids could participate virtually, but that wouldn't be ideal. So kids may have independent practice to do at home on the days where they're not actually at school. So that could be a work submission or an enrichment or something like that. If you look at the bottom of this page, that is an example of a folder structure that you might see in Schoology. And so we would work with kids to help them understand that and be accustomed to that in case we moved into one of the at-home or hybrid models. Days of the week, I mean, we are looking at all just different scenarios. So we can come to an agreement as a district and have some consistency for our kids and our parents and our teachers. So this is our draft. It is a first draft. I want to thank Jeff. He helped lead groups, work groups. Tiffany and Josh were in those work groups and they're in our audience. This was a group effort and it is a first draft. And so with that, we welcome your comments or your questions or your input on the work that has been done so far. Jeff, come up here. You're up here too.
I'll start. I'll start. Certainly want to say, first of all, thank you to everybody who participated and in putting this all together. Obviously, it's a lot of work and hopefully maybe some scenarios that we don't have to use, but we need to have them in place. And then kind of my comment is around the little graphic, which I think is key. I have to put my glasses on to see it.
I know. Sorry.
But we talked a little bit about what would determine which one of those boxes we'd end up in, right? Things from TA in terms of capacity potentially. I think to me, that's a piece I'd like to see a little more of. I mean, I'm that process person. Where do you get to a point and what are the criteria that force you to make the decision to move to one box or the other or back? And again, some of it's not going to be our choice. It's going to be given, the directives would be given to us. But I do think in some cases we might have to make some choices in there, right? When do we, if and when, worst case scenario, we would have to move from, an on-site learning to either the hybrid or at home, what exactly would be the criteria that made us make that decision? And I don't know if y'all have had those discussions. I'm assuming some, but those will be some of the hard, I think, decisions in knowing those points. And I don't know if you want to answer that. That's more, I guess, a comment.
Well, I think a lot of that's going to come from the state and our local authorities, to say, kind of like this time, to say businesses need to close or schools need to close. I mean, some of that is going to be dictated to us. And certainly the hybrid model, if they say, okay, 25% of the kids can come back to school or 50% or 75 or whatever. So some of that is kind of unknown right now. It will just be depending on the circumstances, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Kimberly, are you asking kind of in the terms of, say we have a handful of students that test positive in one classroom or their families test positive? Is that the kind of scenarios and criteria that you're asking about?
Like what would trigger it?
That's
Right.
exactly where I was going to go next. I think, for the whole district and population, I think a lot of that will come from the state.
Yay.
But there certainly might be situations where there is a decision that has to be made on a classroom or on groups of kids, and just wondering how far we've got along into those
Sure.
discussions.
We actually have had some.
Yes, and
discussion.
actually what I would anticipate is similar to what UIL has done with the strength and conditioning. So some of their parameters are if a student, tests positive, then that particular group is removed or quarantined for 2 weeks. So I anticipate TEA telling us, move forward, have school. And however, if there's this case positive, then this class has to go into quarantine. I think there are going to be parameters dictated to us that probably Kimberly will allow us to come back and provide some local markers if we so choose to identify those. I'd be hesitant trying to determine them until I know what the state's telling me first, but I understand I understand what you're saying, though.
And and I guess at some point too, there may be, again, pieces of our population, small pieces, hopefully, that would maybe have to be doing a at-home learning while other pieces,
Yeah,
people were in the classroom.
yeah, in the onsite.
On the onsite. I'm going to add one other comment that's been on my mind. The childcare was one thing that, we obviously, we recognize that potentially it is going to be burdensome to our parents and teachers. I don't know if any of us have a solution to that, right? If we have to limit capacity. But the other thing I wanted to know if anybody's thought about is kind of some of our policies around absences. And the fact, trying to do our best to encourage students and teachers that when they're sick or they think they're sick to stay home. And I know particularly with some high school students, there's some policies that, that
With grading.
influences them,
Yeah.
encourages them to
Yeah.
come to school. And I just wanted to see if that's been discussed.
Well, I know Ms. Hester was reviewing this with the principals.
She was.
And so I don't know the details of the conversation. I'll look at Ms. Parkerson or someone else. But part of the conversation was around the attendance piece and whether the incentive built around attendance. And I don't know how far, Tiffany, I apologize, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but did y'all have a conversation or land anywhere, or just begin the conversation around that?
Me microphone.
Oh, okay, sorry.
We began the conversation with the principals group and anticipate finishing that in the grading guidelines meeting in this upcoming week.
Okay.
But we share similar concerns that you have expressed, Ms. McAdams. So know that we are in the same thought process.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that had started. And Ms. Hester actually spoke with Cabinet about it, but I knew she was meeting with principals and I wasn't sure how far along they were in their conversation. But it would be, not sure it'd be wise to account for, to incentivize attendance during these times.
Okay, well, that is our first draft. Thank you for your input, and thank you for the work groups that worked on this. Thanks, Jeff.
That was a awesome presentation, and obviously y'all have spent hours and hours and hours, and we'd like to thank all the team members that have helped y'all get where we're at, and especially with the situation being so fluid. I think the virtual learning is the one that really, I guess, concerns me the most, just for the fact that it can change so much. We could have, obviously, we're probably going to have people, families that don't send their kids back, whether it's 2 third graders or 30. And then for y'all having to figure out how you're going to staff those,
It's going to be,
obviously, we're going to have a teacher there, and then with that teacher being there, it's just a
it's going to be a challenge.
challenge, and then just that in itself a challenge plus staffing it, and then the financial ramifications of that as well.
Right.
But very, very good job.
Thank you.
We will move to item C3, consideration and discussion related to House Bill 3, required board plans and goals for the 2020 and the 21 school year. Mr. Martindale.
So I told Dr. Trumman to wear comfortable shoes since we're workshopping, we're standing this evening to distance ourselves.
And I
Penny's
did,
going to go over this one. Now, with this, today, during the commissioner's call, previously with House Bill 3, these board goals associated with student performance at the third grade level in literacy and reading, as well as the college, career, and military readiness, boards were supposed to adopt long-range markers or values for student performance. Those were supposed to be done prior to the beginning of this upcoming school year. And we were actually, when we were scheduled for our March meeting, going to review dates to do some of the training through Region 6 that's a part of this goal setting. Of course, then COVID happened, and I know Ms. Horn's been emailing the group trying to solidify a date for evaluating, it's called Evaluating Student Outcomes Training. Again, the Service Center will provide us. Penny is going to provide an overview, because we're going to give an overview and then come forward with those goals for consideration next month, because training and then adoption of these goals is out of whack due to COVID closure. However, today the commissioner announced that the deadline for adopting these goals has been extended to January 31st of 2021.
Right.
Correct, Dr. Trammell?
That is correct. That is what he said.
So we have went from being kind of pressed for time to having 6 months. So with that being said, Penny, if you will still go ahead and give us a brief presentation, but now that we have significant amount of time, I don't know that we'll come back next month to approve those, but rather we'll continue to try to sync our schedules and get that training with the Service Center through the course of the fall, because that'll help. That touches on some of this as well. Of course, Penny's going to give you an overview, but when we have that training with Region 6 this fall, it'll fill in some of the details. And then we can come back with those goals for board approval later on in the fall. So, yeah, we went from feeling pressed for time, which everyone did, to now, again, at 3:15 today, he said, now you have till January 31st to do this. So we'll still get ahead of schedule since we've given some time. So Penny's going to give a brief overview so you kind of have a feel of what this looks like, but know that this is just the beginning, and we just have been given the grace of time on this item as well, like all other districts.
Okay. And House Bill 3 just keeps on giving, and board goals and plans are part of it. Specifically in two areas, as Mr. Martindale mentioned, early childhood and college, career, and military ready plans. You may say, why does this matter? Why are we doing this? Well, House Bill 21 in the 85th legislative session created the Texas Commission on Public School Finance. And their charge was to improve or make recommendations for improvement on the current Texas finance system. So their recommendation was to set a goal pre-K through 12th grade with 2 markers. And those markers are at 3rd grade and seniors in high school at the 12th grade level. So that is why we have board goals and plans. These goals are aligned with an initiative way back from 2015. I don't know if any of you remember. Texas has a goal, it's called 60 by 30, where they say to be competitive in a global economy, 60% of Texans need a college degree or some kind of work certificate to compete and be successful. So that's what the experts say. So the commission says you will establish locally developed goal boards, and not only that, you will report annually on your progress to these goals. Not only will you report progress on the overarching goal, you will report progress on any measures you use to track your progress toward meeting the overarching goal. In addition to that, we are required to look at metrics on different groups of students. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. So what is your role? Your role is to review and ultimately vote to adopt each plan. So the district has to set an overarching district goal in literacy and math, at the early childhood level, and in our case, the state defines that at the third grade level, and then at the senior level at our 3 high schools. So you will need to review those plans and vote and adopt those plans. This is just the requirement and a management team, and in this case, a management team was just the district coordinators, myself, and the principals of the schools. So involved in the management teams are the 10 elementary principals and the 3 high school principals, and then their administrative teams. And we used data from our state assessments and our MAP assessments in this, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Specifically, the early childhood literacy and math goal and the college, career, and military ready plans have requirements to assign at least one district level administrator or an employee of the regional service center to oversee the coordination of the plans, to set specific quantifiable annual goals for 5 years at each campus, and in our case, it's the 10 elementaries and the 3 high schools, to be reviewed at least annually by the board, so you will need to get an annual report, and it needs to be in a public meeting, and then to post that annual report on the district and the campus websites. Here's an example of a literacy goal for 3rd grade, and this is a state example. This is not our literacy goal for 3rd grade as a district. The percent of 3rd grade students that score meets or above on STAR reading will increase from 41% to 55% by June 2024. So these are 5-year goals, and we have to look at our floor and set incremental increases over the next 5 years to predict, okay, where are we going to commit to being in 2024? Remember, I told you we have to look at groups, look at metrics for different groups. So these are the groups that we are looking at the metrics for. Any group that we have 30 or more students in as a district, we will need to set a 5-year goal for them as well. So we would look at our first group, decide where they were in, and in our case, because we didn't have 2019, 2020 STAR data available at the high school level, we had to use our 2018-19 data for our CCMR, our college, career, military ready data. We would look at where they scored, and then we would set our goals, incrementally increasing all the way down to the year 2024 from where we began. And we would do that for each group across the way, and this would be part of what is posted on our website. In addition to that, we have 3 progress monitoring measures required. So we can't just say, okay, we're going to have this big goal. We're going to look at all these different groups of kids, and yes, we're going to meet it because we're great like that. We have to have 3 progress measures to ensure we are tracking and working to meet this goal. The progress measures are at pre-kindergarten, at kindergarten, and then 1st through 3rd grade in literacy. So in pre-kindergarten or pre-K, they are using the state example. They're using the CIRCLE exam, which is the CIRCLE Progress Monitoring Literacy Test. We also use that. So we are aligned with the state in that way. We have looked at that. We have set that goal for every pre-K campus as part of their monitoring process. The progress measure 2 for kindergarten, the commissioner just adopted this test in late April, early May. If we use this test, our teachers would have to have training on this test. We've already said we don't have time for training. We need every instructional day we can get. We gave kindergarten MAP last year, and so we are electing to use the MAP test because it's no change for our teachers. They've already given it. Administrators are already familiar with it. So we are seeking a waiver to get permission just to use that test this year so that it won't be another change for our teachers. Progress measure 3 for first through third grade, we also are going to use the MAP test. It's an assessment that we're giving anyway for the beginning of the year, and it tests all the students. If you look at what the state is using, they're using the TPRI or the Tejas-Lee. So we are giving the MAP already. This will keep us from having to give additional assessments. So that will be the difference in the state's monitoring criteria and ours. Then they follow that exact same pattern for the early childhood math goal. Same thing, district overall, and if this were a campus plan, it would be the campus overall. So the big goal stated in the same terms with same measurable outcomes for the 5-year span. If you look, they are increasing incrementally, starting with the 2020 school year, this school year, about 2 or 3 percentage points a year. Again, we have to look at the different groups of students and set goals for them over the next 5 years to 2024. Again, we have 3 progress monitoring measures. In this case, they're using the circle test. We're using the circle test at pre-K. They are using the test that the commissioner just adopted, and they are also using the TIMI at first and second grade. We are saying we would like to use the MAP test. We're giving it anyway, and our kids are familiar with that test. So that would be the difference in the state's monitoring measures and ours. So basically, the district would do this, and then each campus has to do this at the elementary level. Then each campus has to write a plan. In that plan has to be staff development. The state is recommending and basically telling us every teacher will have to attend the literacy academies, which we already knew. So we're including that in our elementary plans. And then they say we have to have timelines and a couple of different things in our plans. So elementary principals have pretty much got those written at this point, and all their data is in their charts. Moving to the senior level and CCMR. This is how the state, and we just replicated it for our 3 high schools, writes the CCMR goals. The percentage of graduates that meet the criteria for CCMR outcome bonuses will increase from 42% to 57.5% by August 2024. Same pattern. Look, they incrementally increase over a 5-year period. They too have to look at these groups of students. They too have to have progress monitoring measures. The progress monitoring measures here are 1 for college ready, 1 for career ready, and 1 for military ready. So those are the 3 progress monitoring measures at the high school level. Each high school has to write a plan based on their data, and you will have to approve and adopt, read and adopt those plans. So the following components have to be visible on the website for the schools of each plan. The 5-year board outcome goals, the annual targets, the applicable closing the gap student data, which we looked at those student groups, and the progress measures. Each campus's plans with their specific targets and their closing achievement gap groups, and each campus's action plans, like what they've written that they're going to do. A monitoring calendar to say when you're going to get your annual report, and then there's interim reports, as you see at the very bottom of this slide, if I hadn't have touched it, that you will get. I recommend we get those through transmittal and post them, but that is totally up to y'all. This is the training Mr. Martindale was talking about that is due by September the 1st. It is required by Senate Bill 1566 every 2 years. In January, they added this particular training on board goals and plans. And so you will get that updated training when that is scheduled. And with that, this has already changed as a result, of 3 o'clock today. We have until January 31st, 2021 to adopt the plans, but more information to come. And that's it. Any questions or,
Any questions?
sorry, preview of more to come. You're welcome.
As any student, we kind of like the extra time.
Yes.
If there's nothing else, we will move to item D, adjourn, and then the regular meeting will start at 7 o'clock.